Personalized learning that we see involves the student having different experiences, so divergent experiences all along the way. So what that really looks like is that in an individualized experience, you're trying to get everyone to the same point, and you're trying to optimize the way they get to that point. Whereas in the personalized experience, there are actually different objectives for each person. Either the student themselves set their own goals, or maybe based on another factor, you set the goals with them. But really, they're getting to a different point. And when they get to a different point, they can do different things along the way. And they'll have a different experience than all the other students, and that means they have something to share, they've got something to talk about, something to help other people with. So there are many different things in there. But that's really the main differentiator. Okay, so to create this personal community, or the personal experiences for students, one of the ways that we look at it is that students really build their own connections in the community. So in a MOOC, you've got lots of people, and people will naturally kind of fall into different groups. And they'll kind of pick out people who may share their view or their thoughts. They may find people who they become friends with, and others they don't. So really it's like, a MOOC is like an entire school or university online sometimes. You can have tens of thousands of people or thousands of people, and you won't know all of them. Many things will happen in the MOOC that you're not aware of. And it's really just this sort of community with a life of its own. So you have to design the MOOC to have activities that encourage the right, sort of the right level of interaction. But also, if you don't do a few things initially, then you'll never really get that community to start with. So one of the first ones, one of the main ones we look at is building rapport within the community. So when people first join the course, when they first join anything, actually people normally introduce themselves. You talk about what you're doing, you sit next to someone, maybe you say something, maybe you don't. But you really get to know people. And that happens very naturally in a face-to-face class. Sometimes, even if the teacher does nothing and the teacher does a terrible job, the students will find it funny and they'll still get to know each other. But on an online course, in a MOOC, you don't really have that. Everyone's coming in from different places. No one really knows each other. So you actually have to work even harder to design activities to get students to start talking to each other and to interact with each other, and to get them used to doing that. And really, the time to do that is in the first week or two of the course, or the first sort of module, or whatever the first thing is, that's where you normally do it. Because it's interesting. Even in face-to-face lectures, if people sit down in, say, a large class, and they sit next to each other, and they don't introduce themselves in the first certain number of minutes, or even if it's an ongoing lecture in the first lecture, they'll be very scared to introduce themselves afterwards. I don't know, maybe it's me, but you may have experienced this as well, where it's if you don't introduce yourself initially, it's a bit awkward to introduce yourself 3 hours later after you've been sitting next to them for a long time. It's almost like when you sit next to someone on the plane. If you say hi immediately, then you can start talking, but if you wait till like halfway through the flight, it might be a bit awkward. So it's just like that online. If students don't get to know each other in the very beginning, then it'll be very difficult for them to get to know each other later on. And we see huge impacts on the level of interaction and the quality of interaction if students don't get to know each other early. It's also quite important in terms of fostering teams. So when you do a lot of project-based learning, you'll probably want the students to form teams in those and form groups in the MOOC. But unless they've gotten to know each other in some way, they won't know who they should contact to join their team. So you have to, depending on the types of activities you're doing, you have to consider a few different things. So there's a few other areas in this. One is the way in which the teacher interacts and facilitates the community. So in this model, the role of the teacher involves three key things. The teacher, in this sense, is really the facilitator of the course. They're not the sort of disseminator of information. They're not there to tell the students everything they need to know. But they're there to kind of guide the students, to mentor them, to help them along the way. And they're really the experience designer. So they're there to curate and develop different types of activities for the students to do, and to find ways to get them interacting. Maybe you notice, the there's a trend happening in the community and you want to address that, you can actually create an activity to address it. So in these roles, the teacher does a few things. They do many things. Actually, yeah. You'd be very busy as a teacher. but they're very fun things. And it's a bit I think it's what you would normally do in a face-to-face class. But what happens when you move online is there's this sense that as soon as you put something online, the first thing you think about is uploading content. So this is kind of trying to break down that idea. So what the teacher does in these roles is really they create these experiences, they create different situations, they really curate the community, almost like as a community manager. They don't answer everyone's question. I think a great facilitator actually sees someone raise an urgent question, and then they wait a little bit, like they hold back themselves. You may want to answer it yourself, but you don't, and you wait to see if other students will answer it. And in a really good community, other students will come in and they'll answer the questions. And then the teacher actually doesn't have to answer everything. But to get that happening, you have to really build rapport early on with the students, really get them interacting with each other. And then throughout the course, they'll just get used to it. As soon as a question comes up, the students will answer it. The teacher doesn't have to. But you can always jump in. But it's quite important because in a MOOC, you might have thousands or tens of thousands of comments. And you can't really be across all of those, and you don't need to. It's like if you were trying to listen in on everyone's conversation in the classroom. You probably wouldn't want to do that, and you probably wouldn't want to try. But in a MOOC, you actually have the ability to do that. So you have to kind of restrain yourself a bit from listening in on everyone's conversations. And you might have to. So you might have to guide the community in certain directions as well. So the community could start going off on a tangent, or adopting an idea that you don't really want to do in the course. So you really have to guide them and mentor them, kind of bring them back on track. So there's a few things to do with that, there's many more things to know. But some of the more interesting things, it's all interesting, but some of the things I wanted to focus more on is really how you practically do this, and then show you examples of how it's done in different courses. And then we can kind of have a discussion around that. So some of the examples of learning activities that we've seen can be quite effective and increase engagement fall into a lot of different categories. And these are sort of cross-discipline. So the way that we've broken it up is that most of these involve sharing or working in groups. But the main ones that we look at are sort of create and share, which we call, or create and construct, or create and do. So it's where the student goes out and does something, they record it or take a picture of it in some way, or they write about it as a reflection, and they share it back with the community. And then everyone gives them feedback on it. And what's interesting in a MOOC is that when the students actually have to share something with the community, they actually put more work into it than if they were going to share it with the teacher, because they don't really want to embarrass themselves amongst some peers. So they'll actually work really hard, they'll make it really nice, whereas a lot of times if you're just submitting it into a black hole, then no one really cares too much. So as part of that, we're actually changing the language on open learning. So instead of submitting an assignment or an activity, the student actually posts it. And they post it to the community, or they post it to a teacher. And the language is important, especially in these sort of communities, because when you talk about submitting something, it's like you're subservient to the teacher, and that's not really the idea that you want. For the community to work effectively, the student has to be really empowered, and they have to feel like they've got something to contribute. So when you design activities, you design them to relate to people's personal experiences, so that they feel that no matter how they answer, they aren't really giving a wrong answer. They're giving an answer from their personal experience. And that's really rewarding to the student. It really helps them sort of break the ice and actually do something. Whereas if you have a fear that you're always going to be wrong, you'll be very scared to do anything at all. So designing activities so it's really based on the student's experiences or opinions is quite important. Some other types of activities, I'm just going to pick out a few. But we have all of these online so you can look at. Discover and share is a fun one online. So discover and share, where you find something and you say, find me examples of this. And students have to go out and find better examples of it. So you can actually almost use that to crowdsource parts of a course. So you can say, I need a video on, or I need some activity on how to understand this particular concept. And then the students will go out and find it. So we've actually seen it happen where a teacher, and they do this not knowingly. They actually forget to put in a part of a course. Like maybe they say, this is the topic, and they forget to put anything on the page. Now you might wonder what kind of teacher would do that, but a lot of people building online courses sometimes forget about pages here and there. So when that happens, we actually see the students fill it in themselves using the commenting on Open Learning. So the students kind of take that as an indication that they're supposed to